So thanks, Andrea, for that introduction to this workshop. So right now we are going to jump right into life cycle 1, which, as Andrea mentioned, is before the meeting. The rest of the sessions today will consist of life cycle 1 items. And you may have noticed that the entire first day of the workshop is dedicated to introduction and then just life cycle 1, or the things that happen before a meeting ever even starts. Tomorrow we'll cover 2 and 3, and while all 3 life cycles are critical to a meeting's success, what happens before a meeting ever starts can really make or break it. So that's why there's basically a full day set to just before the meeting, and then a day spent to during and after a meeting. So long before hosting any virtual meeting, the first step is to choose the right tool for the job, and that is the topic of this session. So when I say tools, I'm talking about the various software platforms or computer programs that are available for hosting virtual meetings. And throughout this session, you might hear me call them tools, platforms, or software, but I'm talking about the same thing. So while we talk about various platforms and throughout the entire workshop, keep in mind that this workshop is not about how to use specific virtual meeting platforms. While there may be moments when we're able to show a few quick little tips, particularly tomorrow, overall the workshop is about the meeting itself and not the software used to host it. So that said, as was mentioned, the very first step to planning a successful virtual meeting is to choose the right software for the job. So we're going to review a few factors that should go into choosing a tool, and then we'll review some of the options that may be available to you. And note that during this session and throughout the entire workshop, reference to any specific product does not constitute or imply an endorsement or recommendation of that product. So within the EMSC space, the initial considerations when we're looking at virtual meeting tools are HIPAA compliance, IT requirements, and then the different types of meetings that you need to be hosting. So given that we all work in the world of healthcare, HIPAA is something that needs to be considered first and foremost. Depending on the type of information and the data that you actually work with, having HIPAA compliant software may not be required, but if it is, it's a primary concern. Regardless of where your state EMSC program is housed, you'll want to check into your organization's requirements in regards to HIPAA. When HIPAA compliance is necessary, getting meeting software that is HIPAA compliant requires more than just verifying that their data is encrypted, or that on the Zoom website or whatever program website it says HIPAA compliance. There's more to it than that. Your organization will actually need to sign a contract called a business associate agreement with the software creator, whether that's Zoom or Microsoft or Webex or whoever it might be, in order for that to be considered HIPAA compliant software. Sorry. Due to possible HIPAA requirements, your IT department may already have contracts in place for software that meets your organization's needs. So as such, it may be that you are required to use a specific piece of software and you don't really have a lot of leeway. If that's not the case, you will still need to work with your IT department to choose a platform that is best. And this is best done very early in the process. You don't want to get too far along and then find out that IT isn't going to let you do something anyway. And then the last of the first few thoughts is that you have to, it's important to understand the difference between a meeting and a webinar. Often the two words are actually used interchangeably, but when it really comes down to it, they're different things. A meeting is generally going to be a smaller interactive meeting where the audience participants participate. And a webinar is more like a virtual lecture where the audience mostly just listens, and generally speaking, there are more attendees to a webinar than a meeting. Many virtual meeting platforms will allow for either a meeting or a webinar. But if you want an interactive meeting, it is important to ensure that the tool you select has that capability. So once you have figured out which options are compatible with HIPAA and IT and whether you need just meetings or whether you need a webinar as well, there are basically 3 primary questions that you should ask to guide you to a proper software. The first one is, what is the key functionality I need for this remote meeting to be successful? Second, how many people need to be involved in my remote meeting? And 3, how can technology make my remote meeting more efficient? So the key functionality you need depends on you and your meeting. It may also change from meeting to meeting depending on the topic or the participants. Consider the different aspects of your meeting. Will you just be presenting information without much discussion? Will you be reviewing a document? Or will you be conducting a brainstorming? Those are just some examples of aspects of a meeting you want to consider. Regardless of those aspects, there are a few general functionalities that are important for the majority of meetings, and we're going to cover just a couple of those. The first, obviously, is that audio and video capabilities are non-negotiable. Without audio capability, the entire meeting is shot for obvious reasons. And as far as video goes, having that capability is less necessary than audio, but it can help increase participant engagement. Having video as an option does not necessarily mean that you should feel obligated to turn it on during every meeting you host, but the ability to do so is important. And Jane will go into more depth on this a little bit during the engagement session tomorrow. Second is screen sharing. So it's another important feature in order to get the most out of a meeting. It ensures that all meeting participants are able to see what you are seeing and thus boosts engagement. So providing visuals for participants to focus on is really important for people to stay focused, which is also further important for engagement. And here at NEDARC, we almost always use screen sharing. Even if we have just like a pop-up meeting that occurs with little to no prior planning, if an emergency comes up and we have a pop-up meeting, we still often end up using screen sharing to do that. So it's a pretty critical aspect of any software that you're gonna want to select. So the next question that we're gonna look into is how many people need to be involved in my remote meeting? So meeting capacity is something that can change quite a bit between different platforms and also between different account levels on the same platform. And that's kind of the big key. And we'll talk about that a little bit towards the end here when we go over the different software options. So you're unlikely to run into capacity problems if your meetings are limited to a max of like, say, 10 or maybe 15 people. But if you ever need to host a meeting for a couple dozen people or even hundreds of people, capacity has to be considered because most account levels have a limit on how many people can participate in a meeting or even a webinar. Chat and instant messenger programs are going to be insufficient for a full virtual meeting. Programs like Skype are designed to communicate with just a few people and generally one at a time. And they just don't have all the features that you need for an effective meeting. Even if they have that video chat feature, they just, generally speaking, are not going to be sufficient for an effective meeting. So depending on your audience, accessibility and ease of use for external partners or guests is an important consideration. If you have some external participants that will need to be a part of your meetings regularly, you'll need to check whether or not their employer blocks any platforms. And that's actually something that we've run into occasionally within the EMSC program. And some people have had certain platforms blocked and been unable to participate in certain things. So again, if there's specific people that regularly need to participate, you'll want to make sure that they can do so. All right, and then the third question is, how can technology make my remote meeting more efficient? Many programs can do this by providing the ability to download documents. Some allow you to give others the ability to present and share their own screen. Recording capabilities may be important if the meeting is complicated and participants will want to review what was said. And it's also super useful to those who weren't able to attend so that they can catch up and know what was said in the meeting.
Hey, Braden, Anna has her hand up.
Yeah, let's go ahead, Anna.
Hey, thanks. Suggestion and raise my hand before speaking up. I have a question. On a previous slide, you spoke of outside attendees who had issues accessing certain platforms. And I don't know if you're going to talk more about that, but I would love to hear more about that. But I wanted to know if anybody's had any issues with unwanted participants. I know when meetings first started going remote, we saw these awful, people basically trolling into meetings that they weren't invited to. And what are some ways of handling that if anybody has had that issue?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and open it up to the group, and then once people have had a chance to talk, I'll follow up with my thoughts on it.
Zach's got his hand up. Zach, go ahead.
One of the ways that hi, Zach from New Jersey. One of the ways that we do that is make it registered only, and also the platforms that we currently use in New Jersey all have the ability for a moderator, and the moderator can block people or kick them out of the meeting if they're unwanted and somehow got in. It also gives the moderator also has the ability to mute people. If someone, that one person who never really mutes themselves, the moderator can go in and mute them. It's kind of like the same issue, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, our facility only uses Webex, which I can mute folks if I'm the host of the meeting, but I don't know if I can kick folks out, but something I should look into.
Yeah, I have.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I have experienced that most programs do allow a moderator to mute, and I would bet Webex can kick out, but I don't know that for sure. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Amy in New York says, yeah, other sometimes participants will invite other people that don't need to be in the meeting. And then Rachel Ford says use the Zoom registration function, I guess, is a way to control for that. Dwayne mentions the mute issue is very important.
Yeah.
And then Rachel is saying that Rachel Ford, she sets it up initially so they're muted upon entry, so participants are muted upon entry, and she's also booted people out of the meeting if they don't keep themselves muted and keep interrupting.
And that's great. One other thought that I had that's very similar, and I know that at least Zoom allows it. I haven't checked into other platforms, but is the idea of a waiting room where everybody who comes to the meeting gets put in a waiting room first, and then a host has to allow people in individually. So that's another way, if you see somebody that you don't recognize, that you can just, they never even enter the meeting. Like I know that at the beginning of COVID, when everybody was doing virtual meetings, there was the Zoom bombing, right? But I think Zoom has done a few things to help with that. But yeah, those are all great ideas. And then I think we have a couple more hands up.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I don't know if Zach is your hands up for a new thought, which is fine. Otherwise, you might want to just remove your hand. And I can't see if
it's like Andrea and
sorry about that. I put my hand down.
No worries, Zach.
No problem.
Okay. Andrea and Jane have hands up that I can see.
I don't. Oh, I can't see them because it's blurred into their background. No, we're not allowing NEDARC staff to talk.
Jane's at the top of mine, so let's go ahead and have Jane, and then Andrea can finish up.
I was just going to mention that for meetings that aren't as formal, or meetings that you have just kind of one-on-one with people, to remember that when you schedule those in Outlook, it's using the same link for your room. And so if you schedule meetings back to back and a participant joins a meeting early, they might be entering a meeting you're still in. So try to schedule like internal meetings and things like that. There is a setting, I think, in Zoom that was mentioned that people put in a waiting room, and that's helpful as well. But if you have back to back meetings, sometimes you might get people entering a meeting that you're currently in and need to ask them to leave until you start.
That's a good point. It may not even be somebody Zoom bombing, but just somebody on time for the next meeting.
Great. Andrea.
I wanted to address Anna's first question, which was the point about external participants. Can they join? So there's various reasons why. So for example, when COVID first happened, everyone immediately went remotely. Like MS Teams would not allow you to share with people outside of essentially your team, your group, meaning externally. They've since changed that now because of the response of people needing it to be able to do that, because initially what the intent of Teams would be. So some of it is the platforms are making changes to make it so that external people can use it. The other block to people getting access is it could be that they're locked down at the administrative level, meaning the IT level within their department. For example, Catherine Dixon Hurt cannot access Zoom, at least last I heard. So I don't know if that's changed for her.
It has. It has.
Yay, good. But so it could be on many different levels where the problem's happening. So you have to find that out and then figure out what's the best way to fix it. I mean, you can't help it if the platform is blocking external people. But if it's something at their administrative side, then you'd have to work with them. So, or the other thing you can do is just find out the people who you normally meet with externally and find out what programs they use, like we did when we had people register for this workshop.
Great, thank you. Mark Minkler in Maine has his hand up. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Mike. Just one other thought as we talk about this, and I'm sure many other programs fall into this, but we have some pretty heavy statutory requirements. So for example, if we were holding an EMSC advisory committee meeting, we have to allow access not just by computer. We can't make a requirement that you have to have video. We have to make access by phone as well. So we've had some challenges with some platforms that don't functionally allow calling in by phone. And that becomes a hindrance and a violation of state law for us if we don't make that. So just something that even if you want people to have video, they may not have to have video because of access. So just a thought.
Thanks, Mark, thanks for bringing that up. We're going to talk about that exact thing. That was perfect.
And Greg in North Carolina looks like he's seeing a similar thing. You know, the ability to call into a meeting with phone rather than just the computer, which is a really helpful feature for hearing impaired attendants that may use Bluetooth technology, I guess, to their phones to hear audio.
Any other questions with that? I really appreciate that conversation, and Anna for asking that question. That's really great. All right, let's hop back. I think we had talked about document downloads, allowing others to present and recording. And then the last one was going to be the built-in chat features. And that's another feature that can improve the efficiency and participation in meetings. And these virtual workshops, for example, would be much more difficult without the ability to type in questions and comments in chat. And all of these things help increase engagement. So using a platform that improves meeting efficiency is always going to help increase the engagement. So now we are going to spend just a couple of minutes going over a couple of platform examples. And they're in no particular order, and these are listed in the order from most commonly used among EMSC program managers to least commonly used among EMSC program managers. Keep in mind the list is not comprehensive. There are a number of quality platforms that we just don't have time to mention. And each of the platforms that will be mentioned have features that we won't have time to cover. We're not trying to say that any specific platform is clearly superior to another, because that will largely depend on your needs. And then finally, the companies that create these platforms are always improving and updating their products, especially in the last year, with so many people moving to hybrid and at-home work schedules. And I think an example was that Andre mentioned with MS Teams, that initially it was tough to get guests in, but now they have fixed that and it's not so bad. If you don't see a feature that you want with a platform, wait a couple of months and it might just show up. You know, there's a decent chance of that actually. And then finally, just another quick reminder that we don't endorse any of the specific products. So the first one, the most commonly used virtual meeting platform among workshop participants is Zoom. And that was about 45% of registrants saying that it was their primary platform. The pros include, first off, that Zoom is really quite ubiquitous. It doesn't surprise me that Zoom is the most commonly used platform in this group. It has become a pretty widespread platform for this kind of thing. Zoom has a really pretty solid free tier. So if you're unable to pay for a program, Zoom is the free tier they have is solid. It allows guests to join via the web browser, which is kind of nice. I don't have that one listed up here. It turns out most of them do. And then the recordings, if you record a meeting, it is downloaded directly to your computer. So it's actually pretty easy to share those recordings. You just get an MP4 file and you can upload it to YouTube, or you can, share it however else you would share a file. And that's kind of a nice feature. Some cons to Zoom include the fact that access to a toll-free dial-in number and cloud storage for your recordings, if you wanted Zoom to save your recordings rather than have them on your computer. Both of those are add-on features. So like Mark mentioned, if you have to have a toll-free number, you can't do that with a free version. You have to have a paid version, and beyond that, it's actually an add-on feature that needs to be included in your contract with Zoom.
Braden, you have about 10 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. Also, the document sharing capabilities through the Zoom app we've found are pretty limited. So if you're hoping to share a lot of documents and stuff through Zoom, you can do so through the chat, but internally here with NEDARC, when we've been trying to do that, it does seem to be fairly limited. It doesn't work great. And then on the note of the Zoom chat, and you may have noticed if you've tried, it doesn't let you copy and paste. So if you type in a link, you can't really copy and paste it. You should be able to click through, but that's just kind of another little quirk with Zoom that I do expect they'll get it fixed eventually, but at any point for now, that's the case. And then the last thing is that you can't actually, if you're going into the Zoom app to send a meeting invitation, it doesn't let you include a description or the agenda with that invitation. That said, if you use Microsoft Outlook as your email client, there's a free Zoom add-on for Outlook that does allow you to send your Zoom meeting invitations through the email with descriptions and attachments. It's basically just like an email, but it automatically drops all your link and all the meeting information in there. So that's a good workaround if you use Microsoft Outlook and need to include like attachments with your meeting invitation. Moving on to the next one, the second most commonly used platform among registrants is Microsoft Teams, and that's about 25% that say they use it as their primary platform. Again, Microsoft Teams provides a pretty solid free tier, and actually the paid tiers are quite reasonably priced. When I was looking at their website, they were one of the cheaper options among the paid tiers. And even further, the full version of Microsoft Teams is included with MS365 accounts. So MS365 is basically Microsoft's, they're kind of pushing towards that. It's like their online Word and Excel and PowerPoint and all that. And if you have a 365 account, you have Microsoft Teams because that's included. If you work at a university, there's a really good chance you already have access to MS Teams. You'd want to check with your IT, but many universities have deals with Microsoft for MS365. I know that's the case here at the University of Utah. And then if you work at a Department of Health or another organization, I would still suggest checking with your IT because it would not be at all unusual for your organization to have a contract for Microsoft Office products, and that may include Teams. Other pros include the fact that Teams integrates really quite seamlessly with other Microsoft Office applications. So if you want to use Word and Excel and things like that, it works right with Teams, and they integrate really well. For example, it's easy to send survey invitations. Oh, sorry, that was when I was typing that out, I was thinking surveys. Easy to send meeting invitations through Outlook, and it syncs right with your Outlook calendar. So if you put a meeting into Teams, it will show up in your Outlook calendar. It's super easy to share Word, Excel, PowerPoint documents, etc. through the Teams app. And it is super feature rich. So Teams includes a lot more than just the audio and video conferencing features. It actually has features to help with like project management and task lists and instant messaging and a whole bunch of stuff like that. All that said, some of these pros that I listed can actually be cons depending on your situation. So first off, because it is so feature rich, it can be quite a bit more complicated than some of the other options. The video conferencing piece of it is fairly straightforward still, but overall the program is quite a bit more complicated than like a Zoom or something like that. And Teams also definitely works best in a Microsoft-centric environment. So it isn't a problem if your computer runs Windows and that's what everybody in your office is using. But if you're all on Macs or if you're all on Chromebooks or something like that, there are Teams applications for those, but they aren't quite as seamless as they are in a Windows Microsoft environment. And then lastly, While Teams allows you to record meetings, the recordings can be difficult to download and share, especially with external partners. That's something that I expect Microsoft is going to be working on, but as of now, it's sharing recordings is kind of a pain through Teams.
Braden, Eddie's got his hand raised. So
please, Eddie, go ahead.
Yeah.
And one thing that maybe Braden will mention is that if these pieces of software are managed through your IT, they might put administrative restrictions. So it might not function like as if you had it at home. So this is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I actually wasn't going to mention that. That's really important. I appreciate you mentioning that, Eddie, that if it doesn't seem like it's working like you think it should, talk to your IT, and there's a chance that it's been locked down a little bit. I'm going to kind of hurry through these next few. Go ahead.
Braden, you've just got about 5 minutes.
Okay, cool. We should be all right. So Webex is basically the elder statesman of virtual meeting platforms. I don't know if it was the first video conferencing software, but it was the first I ever heard about. And it's been around about as long as widespread internet has been around. And about 16% of workshop registrants indicated that they primarily use Webex. So some of the pros, similar to others, it does have some, so this one actually, sorry, I'm confused a little bit. So Webex, one of the pros is that its paid tiers are really quite feature rich. And this includes some features that aren't widely available on a lot of other platforms like closed captioning, meeting transcriptions. They actually have an option with where you can do real-time language translation. Although some of those, like the language translation, are add-on features, they are available, and it's not real common across all the different programs. Further, its document sharing and whiteboard features really are solid, and it provides with all of the paid tiers, you get cloud recording included, meaning if you record a meeting, you can save it onto Webex's servers that are secure and all that stuff, and you don't have to worry about downloading it. You can access it from anywhere, etc. So there's some nice benefits to that. So a couple of the cons include, like Zoom, the fact that if you need a toll-free dial-in number, you'll have to add it on. It is a little bit more on the expensive side in comparison, and as such, it's often considered better for bigger organizations because they can do big enterprise accounts and negotiate deals and stuff. But Webex it's been around for a long time, and there's a reason it's been around for a long time. It's really pretty solid. The last one we're going to go into any detail on is GoToMeeting, and that was indicated by about 13% as the primary virtual meeting tool. A couple of quick pros. Again, the paid features have really pretty solid the paid versions have pretty solid features. A toll-free dial-in number is actually included with GoToMeeting, so that's pretty nice if that's something that you need. And as such, it has good compatibility with phones and phone numbers. They've got a lot of options as far as phones go. And in fact, they actually have a product that includes features designed to fully replace a traditional phone line. Things like call forwarding, call queues, hot desking, voicemail to email transcription, things like that. So you can actually have your desk phone run through GoToMeeting as well as your meeting stuff, your video conferencing. And then also unlimited cloud storage is an option with them and with some of the paid tiers, and actually most of the paid tiers. And not all platforms ever offer unlimited. Even if you're offering or you're on the higher paid tiers, sometimes there's not unlimited offered. So if you have a lot, that could be nice. Real quick, a couple of cons. The free tier is really quite limited with GoToMeeting, especially in comparison to some of the others. You can actually only have 3 participants in a free GoToMeeting meeting. So basically it would work for like a one-on-one, but not much else if you're going to do the free one. And if you need webinar features, like if you need 100 people or if you need to do things like polling and breakout rooms, that's actually a separate program called GoToWebinar, whereas some others actually have those together. And then lastly, depending on the features that you need, it can be a bit more expensive. If you wanted to do all the phone stuff, it could be a little more. If you want to do all the webinar stuff, you'd have to have GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar in theory. So it can end up being a bit more expensive. And then in the words of the late Billy Mays of OxyClean fame, but wait, there's more. There are a lot of platforms that are designed for hosting virtual meetings, and each has its own pros and cons. So as you're reaching, make sure to do a thorough review so you don't miss the one that ends up best fitting your needs. So a lot of the information about the various video conferencing software options that we talked about just now came from an article on pcmag.com. Mike, if you don't mind dropping that into the chat, I think it's in there. If not, that's okay. But the link to that article with more details on each platform, including like their pro and con lists, and most of them they did like a full article on. Those can actually be found in the available resources slide at the end of this session. And then a PDF version of all these slides can be found in the workshop manual, which is on the materials website. Did somebody have a?
Right, I just put in the links that were in for the chat. I'm not sure that article is among them though.
Sorry, I should have checked that before I started. I thought I had put it in there, but maybe not. At any rate, this last slide here, if you come here, it'll link you, and it's this hosting remote meetings user guide. Oh, I didn't change that wording. It's this one right here, the best video conferencing software. So at any rate, we will finish up with just a quick review of choosing the right tool for the job. So the first step, if you're needing to host, is consider if you're needing to host a meeting or a webinar, and then you got to talk to all the right people. Make sure that it's going to meet all the requirements that you have. And then secondly, ask yourself, what is the key functionality I need for this remote meeting to be successful? And most platforms do have the similar basic functionality, but the features on top of that can differ. How many people need to be involved in my remote meeting, and if external guests will need to join? And then lastly, ask yourself, how can technology make my remote meeting more efficient? So a platform might have some cool features, for example, but if you aren't going to end up using them, or they aren't relevant to you, you may not want to worry about it. But at the same time, if those features can help make your meeting more efficient, they really can improve your virtual meetings. So again, here's available resources, and then also here on the references slide,